Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where I interview great leaders and try to extract their wisdom and experience for you to learn from and hopefully avoid making their mistakes. Check out practical-leadership.academy because you want to help your new managers succeed with hybrid or remote working. Josh Novelle, thank you very much for joining me.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Would you be so kind? Would you introduce yourself to both my listeners?
Sure. Both of them? Is that you?
Well, there's my mum, and then there's like one guy.
Perfect. So hi, I'm Josh Novelle. I'm currently the Senior Director of People Experience and Insights, possibly a bit of a mouthful, for Warner Music Group globally. So that's what I kind of do. I work in the kind of digital space to take our human experiences and really quantify them for businesses. So really taking all these nitty-gritty platforms and things happening in the ether and say, well, what's the actual value to the company?
You're one of those really annoying business people.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
One of those really annoying ones that says, oh, that's lovely, but why are we doing that?
Yeah, why is pretty clear on my vocabulary. It's up there with like a Backstreet Boy lyric, pretty much.
Well, you've got the Honda 5 Ys, you've got the Josh Novelle 56 Ys, and you're kidding me, right?
Yeah, pretty much. What's this going to do?
And how much?
It's the more annoying why, really.
That's it. What was your journey to landing with teams? Because that's the subject of the day. How did you end up running teams?
Yeah, it's been quite a fascinating kind of little run, to be honest with you. So one of my first kind of management-y type experiences was way back. I was tech support in retail for, I won't name them, but a mobile distribution company that wasn't attached to any of the networks. And they used to have tech support people in the back of their stores. And I ended up working for one of them. And as you can imagine, it was this mixture of customer service and technical excellence to be able to look at a phone and say, well, it's gone wrong because you've dropped it down the loo, without kind of laughing and making fun of the customer and things like that. And
smells a bit.
It smells a bit, that sort of stuff. And working in that with a keen eye on what's actually profitable for the company meant that I kind of quite rapidly evolved in this tech support role to be accountable and kind of responsible for a large number of the other technical support people. So probably kind of semi-managing some of the most introverted engineering type people you can imagine, but still some of the most fantastic people that you could imagine. But you stick them because they're good at technically in the back of a shop with a load of salespeople, you can already predict how this thing's going to fall apart quite quickly.
I can see where it's going.
Yeah, so talking with them and essentially acting as a bit of a kind of management piece, a bit of a coach piece for the shop managers and also the salesmen to kind of say, this is how you can all pull together to hit a collective commission target and things like that. So that's my first experience, which was fascinating to say the least.
Well, that thread is the business value piece. I've known you for years now. I mean, that's always been your thing.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day,
what's the bloody point?
Yeah, what's the point? I mean, let's look at all these massive layoffs that we've got going on at the moment, and like we can argue, was that down to massive increased hiring during lockdowns and things like that? But for me,
ego is all about ego.
A little bit of ego. Yeah, you're probably quite right there. I think there's also another piece, which is what were they doing? Like, I know many kind of professionals that I think are some of the most fantastic creative people that I've ever met. But you say, but what's that thing going to do? They kind of fall. Look at the shiny next button that I built, and it's kind of, but what's it going to do? And I think at the end of the day, we've got to remember that underneath pretty much everything in a business is profitability. Like, why are we treating people better? Because we believe they'll stay longer, which increases our profitability because hiring is damn expensive, especially at the moment. Why are we putting on all these well-being things? Well, because we want them to live longer. And that means we can work them longer. Like,
work harder, damn you. Be happy.
Like, it may sound incredibly cold, but I like to think that actually, no, it's not. Because if we can have everyone in an organization trying to ROI on their own salary, that's an organization I would be super keen to be part of.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, when they've got, I mean, I've been doing some work with private equity and stuff, and big things there is revenue per employee and profitability per employee.
Yeah.
And these are just simple numbers. And you look at them, it's a really easy way of analyzing a company. How many people, how much money? Divide one by t'other and you go, ha, forget it. Or you go, ha, brilliant, because I can fix it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting piece. One of the kind of key, not problems, but key focuses I'm looking at the moment, and this is what takes it from a kind of standard HR role to a people experience role in my mind, is we are taking responsibility for the efficiency of people.
Yes.
And now that means huge plethoras of automation and various other kind of task elimination, process simplification, and all these sort of things that may sound hugely boring. And in some cases they are. But if we can just simply get stuff out the way of our people, like I think it's been a long kind of held belief in many corporates that it's kind of, oh, the finance platform needs to exist because it does this. But what does that mean to your average Tom, Dick, or Harry in the organization? Like absolutely nothing. They want to be able to come in and write the most kind of inspiring songs in the world. They don't want to have to submit an expense through a random platform they know nothing about. Like they care about getting the money at the end of it. So let's focus on the outputs and the results of stuff. That's a really, really fascinating challenge.
I think productivity is deeply linked to well-being as well.
Yeah.
It's if you are productive, if you are doing a good job, you are happy.
Yeah. And let's be honest, how many, like we both worked in large corporates, how much stuff is there that adds zero value to you? But you kind of have to do it anyway because, oh, I need to submit a timesheet. I need to do this thing. I need to do that thing. Like, because it's just an assumed part of the business because that's how they track or that's how they do something. And it's kind of like, yeah, that could be true. And we might need to do that. But why don't we make it as smooth as possible?
Yeah. And the going to back to your point of the value it brings to the organization and the individual, right? The challenge with any management thing, I'm going to see what I'm doing here. I'm trying to bring it back to that. See, the challenge with any management thing is to link the activities and outputs and productivity of the individual to the needs of the organization. Yeah. And if you can't do that, if you're asking, you get Tom, Dick, and Harry, Jane, Sheila, and Susie to well, we need to, diversity and all that. You need to try and make that connection between one and t'other. Or they're sitting there in the abstract going, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
What's the point? And you're doing reporting and you're thinking, well, what decisions are going to be made in the back of this report? Is it needed? Who's it for?
I mean, even the sort of the things that you just mentioned, like the reporting and things like that. I mean, let's look at like the ChatGPT coming out at the moment. Like those sort of very analytical skills are going to be eliminated. We've already talked about like the digitization of the workforce and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like we're now seeing a growing increase of these automations and stuff. These tasks are going to be eliminated. So why not get on the forefront of it? Why don't you look at reskilling and upskilling and doing all this sort of stuff? Because that's significantly cheaper than hiring new talent into an organization.
Totally.
That your finance person you mentioned, train them from going to writing a report to interpreting a report. Yeah. Because that's huge right there. If you can say, I'm spotting these correlations and these causations, and I've got a hypothesis, because at the end of the day, all these kind of big business theories they're hypotheses. Coke thinks by rolling out the kind of Christmas wagons and things like that it's going to generate more sales. Let's be honest, it's a hypothesis. They've never tested. Let's not do it for 1 year.
They wouldn't dare.
Yeah, it's a hypothesis. So that's the whole. A lot of business is based on good kind of gut feelings that are backed up by numbers, but they're never foolproof.
No. Well, and we say they're backed up by numbers. We know the reality. We know the reality that basically people make the emotional decisions and then rationalize the hell out of them and then go back and say, look, I've made a rational decision here. I sure you have, pal. Totally. I believe you. Yeah. No, really. And look, the data backs it up. Not that I went to find the data in the first place. I mean, trying to make an objective decision is just one of the hardest things humans can do.
I think it's virtually impossible. I mean, for me, it comes down to like, you've got to have a super clear purpose when you're leading an organization, when you're leading a function. Like if you can simply say we exist because of X, that's a common goal that people can get behind. And now if we exist because of X is also something that's valuable to the company, and you've articulated the value of that to the company, that's a pretty solid team right there, that when the kind of redundancy waves come around and things like that, they'll go, oh, well, let's not touch that because that's got an X and Y that really makes sense to us as a business.
Yeah. Nuts. What then, given your this insane predilection you have for ROI, value, business purpose, benefit to the individual and the organization, what advice would you then give to other managers, somebody new in this game?
For me, it's the key role as a manager, for me at least, is get the shit out of people's way and talk to that person honestly about where they want to, where do they get value, what motivates them, because there's not many managers I've worked with in my career where they can kind of say, you enjoy this thing, that's great, but that's not with us. Like that could be like you're phenomenal at like creating the most inspirational masterpieces whatsoever, but we need you to write PowerPoint decks. So you know what? I'm going to help work and develop and nurture you, gleaning what I need from you in the meantime so that you can be set up to be X role in the future. That is a hugely inspiring thing. I think we are custodians of their talent. We can help them kind of hone it and focus it. But at the end of the day, we're there to really kind of get them ready for their next challenge, irregardless of where it is. Someone could say, I want to be bobsledding champion of the world, in which case, you know what, instead of Shrek, Cool Runnings is going to come out as the Christmas movie this year.
Love it. Custodians of talent. I like that. There's a concept of tour of duty as well.
Yeah.
Which I've always liked. Is that the reality when you're having an employment conversation with somebody, a hiring conversation or a annual one-to-one or whatever it is, and you're recognizing that you're not going to be here in 20 years' time. So if you're not going to be here in 20 years' time, you're going to be here in 10 or 6 or 5 or 4 or 3. And hopefully, because 10 years is fairly short these days, hopefully you'll get 3 or 4 years out of somebody. Year 1 is them finding their feet, finding the toilets and how the coffee machine works. Year 2 is really becoming useful and valuable. Year 3 is excelling, mastering everything and getting on with it to the nth degree. And at the same time, preparing themselves for their next gig. Hopefully the next gig is with you, somewhere else, perhaps, growing and developing. But if it's not, it's not.
Yeah, it is exactly that. And your kind of key point there is in your example of that timed competency piece, like our main focus as a business or as people managers should be trying to shorten the trunk at the beginning. I think that's the maximum opportunity. Because to your point, that person's taking 3 years worth of salary. You're getting a year and a half of productivity for them. That means they need to be at least double to make the role even slightly profitable for the company. But to your point, not everyone makes the money evenly. In an organization like where we work, you look at the salesman ROI versus the ops ROI, it's clear to see ops are bringing in kind of service revenue and things like that, but licenses and subscriptions and stuff like that, like the big money, that's coming in from over there. So it's how do you then split that apart? How do you figure out, do you fairly just go headcount by revenue, like you said some of the investment companies do? Or do you try and get a bit more into the nitty gritty of it?
Yeah. I think, my background is revenue and sales and all that sort of stuff. And it's the most measured and most transparent of all functions, I think, and therefore one of the hardest places to work, because everything you do is measured to the nth degree, and success or failure comes in a dime, right? And therefore, a lot of attention is paid to ramp time. How fast can I get this bugger to be up and running and making money for me?
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's equally fair to say that every role really has a ramp time. But it's that ramp time not just to time to competence, but time to, as you said, time to profitability of the role. And you mentioned early on about the ROI and salary. I mean, these are grown-up concepts for most managers. In fact, even some of the most senior people really don't think in those terms. How do you do this?
It's a really interesting point, and I'll ignore the irony of the guy that comes through sales is saying sales is the most difficult and highly observed career path you could ever go through. For me, it comes down to that responsibility and accountability piece. How many people, how many team leads and things like that are just never told the payroll of their own function? Like that's a grown-up conversation to have with these people, and some organizations are hiding that a little bit to say, actually, no, there's not. And then, well, what do you do about the cost, not just the cost of employee, of the cost to equip that employee as well? Should that person be responsible for like their hardware and their software and the subscriptions and I don't know, the lighting over their head? Like, how deep do you want to really go with this thing to really show the profitability? Because hell, like the lights over their head, that's surely going to add a couple of thousand with the environment we're in at the moment. So it's a crazy world, and like to actually kind of start thinking about it like that, I think at the end of the day, companies have boards, companies have investors, companies have all of this sort of stuff. And like we keep saying, especially obviously you and I are from the L&D world primarily, there's always this concept of seat at the table. I don't have a seat at the table. And one of the questions I've always kind of asked is, but are you speaking the language of the table? And the language of the table in a vast majority of organizations that I've worked with, unless you go into the charity sector, are financials.
Totally.
Like you've got to have enough money to make the payroll. Like at the end of the day, you've got to make money make sense for the organization, and baking that down. I mean, there's models like the OGSM model and things like that very kind of high level take all these gobbledygook marketing buzzwords and things like that says, oh, we want to be the best car manufacturer in the world. And it bakes it down to an actual realistic piece that people can attach their own motivations to be like, I'm part of this, that adds to that, that adds to that, that adds to that, that adds to that, that makes us the best car manufacturer in the world. That's powerful. That's hugely powerful.
I mean, if you can then take those breakdowns, the objectives, goals, strategies, and measures, or the objectives and key results, pick your measure, pick your model, you end up then with a concept, I think, of people unit economics. When you talk about unit economics in an organization, which is the customer acquisition cost, it's the lifetime value of the organization, you multiply one by t'other, the gross profitability goes in there, and you end up with this lovely little ratio that everybody wants. But you end up talking about the people unit economics, which is, as you said, it's every penny that this person is costing me, every minute in the day that they're here versus the return that I'm getting from them. And the argument is always going to be, oh, but I can't possibly quantify the value of my role because, by God, then I would actually have to quantify the value of my role. You know, I'm vague and wonderful, and you know, there's probably some terror out there.
Yeah, I mean, like especially I think in the creative world. I mean, how often would you fund a creative kind of MacGyver before, I don't know, you could be funding them for 15, 20 years and suddenly they come out with one thing that makes the entire 15 years make sense.
Totally.
But that requires 14 years of holding your breath. That's a tough thing to do as a leader. And it's about knowing when to do that. And to your point earlier, sometimes it's a guttural thing. Sometimes you're trying to back it up with data, but it's always got to come down to that. Well, what's it going to do for us in the long term? Like, what's the gamble? If someone can produce half their salary every week, but some weeks they'll produce 2, yeah, that's probably worth a gamble. But if someone's 0 for a year and then suddenly times 15, that's a harder thing to explain to investors and shareholders and board members and all that sort of stuff.
You're getting onto the edges of things like, you know, pharma, R&D.
Yeah.
Your teams building and developing and doing nothing, and all of a sudden, bing, cancer drug that saves whatever. But then the incentives are so skewed too, because then you also get somebody messing about for a few years, and then bing, all of a sudden it's, well, I just kind of, this might work. Let's just not, there's yes, the incentives there can be very, very interesting.
I mean, you mentioned the investing world earlier on, like the kind of venture funds and things like that. Like, what's the statistic? It's only like 1 in every like 80 odd even remotely returns the investment. So like I couldn't even begin to do the maths there to kind of say, well, I've got these 85 companies, but as long as one of them does something, then that pays for all other 84. It's a very strange and foreign concept to me, but it's kind of, you got to think of, they're treating those individual companies like we're treating those, like I'm talking about those people, where it's each person is accountable for trying to drive their own profitability and return to the business.
I mean, it's a wonderful concept, but it is having, again, as you said, we both worked in reasonably sized organizations, an alien one for most. How do you link what I do back up to a revenue line? Even just any line in the P&L. And there's a good way of looking at it. So every manager should have a line in the P&L, and they should know what the hell it is.
Yeah. Now I agree with you, but it becomes that debate about, well, how much can you put in that P&L that the manager isn't responsible for? So if you decide you're a Google company or a Google Suite company, and the manager goes, well, I think I could get 365 a bit cheaper. Is that his choice? Is that his option? Or if you just force that into his P&L and he's got no say in it, in which case that's a way to make a very sour person quite quickly. So you've got to make this number, and by the way, you've got no challenge to whether the number's actually effective.
Yeah. It's like anything, if you're involved in the creation of it, you've invested in it. If you're not, then there's a degree of distance between you and the outcome that you actually care about.
Yeah.
Was there an event or a mistake perhaps that taught you the most?
That's a really good question. As you can probably tell, like, I'm a very analytical kind of person. Like I enjoy talking about the numbers and things like that. For me, it comes down, it's the flip side of that but to meet those things, you need to treat people right. And I've seen organizations, and I've been involved with organizations where very quickly you've kind of gone in and gone, oh, there's some bad mojo here. Like something's not lining up. And like I've made career mistakes like that in the past, where you buy into the marketing, you buy into the buzzwords and things like that. And you very quickly kind of go, fundamentally, there's an ethos here that the people turning the crank, there will always be more, because we're knocking them out as quick as possible type thing. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned through my career, is being able to spot that before you're in the door. And that's a really kind of crucial piece, I think, that people in, like, as much as I talk about financials and things like that, the people are not indisposable. The people are not just a number for me. There's a big reason that even in the kind of HR technology world that I exist in, I really am not a fan of the term HCM. So it's human capital management. It's kind of, it always makes me think of kind of cattling and things like Yellowstone.
Yes.
Episodes are coming into my head and things like
branded in the forehead.
Yeah, exactly that. But at the end of the day, you've got to treat the people right. And being able to spot from afar whether a company is treating people right, not just for somewhere you want to work, but it could be somewhere you want to, like, it could be a vendor partnership, it could be all these kind of bits and pieces, but it's got to come down to like treating the people right. Because if not, you're going to end up with, going back to my car analogy, you're going to end up with the most wonderful engine designs in the world, but the person that designed it left 15 years ago, and there's suddenly a problem, and no one can backwards engineer this creative MacGyver genius that came up with this catalyst converter or something like that. But you kind of need that. And yeah, for me, it's biggest lesson you said, being able to spot the warning signs in an organization before you're in bed with them, whether that's employment or partnership or contracts or anything like that, I think is a really, really good lesson that I've learned throughout my time.
What are the warning signs? What do they look like?
Variety of things. I'm a huge fan of transparency sites like your Glassdoor, etc. Like there's no smoke without fire, as they say. So being able to spot the common threads in that. And sometimes those don't take it all on kind of face value. Sometimes those negatives on sites like that can be a positive. Like, what if someone's repeatedly saying there's a real big issue with, I don't know, our facilities or our security team or our building or something like that, and you're being brought in to fix that issue? That's an incredibly positive sign to show that I think a company is listening and feeling and doing all those right things where they've got the fingers on the buds. For me, one of the big kind of questions I've always asked of when I'm meeting people, when I'm talking to people, is a really, really nice one. I've kind of succinct it over my many years, which is magic wand time. When someone says at the end of an interview, what questions do you have? I always go, magic wand time. You've got a magic wand. What would you change in your organization? And it's an unexpected question where most of the time you see people flash an idea in front of their face, see that they can't say that in an interview, and then figure out a more corporate example they can give. Because 9 times out of 10, you can guarantee they've thought of a person. Like, going back to the people thing, they've thought of, like, the old analogy of you lead bad leaders. Like, people leave bad leaders in organization. They've immediately thought of that person over there. I would medieval style take them out to the block type thing. Yeah, and they've not thought about actually systemically, how did that person get there? Why is that person how they are? What's their motivations? How can I link in with that? Because everyone's reasonably selfish at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like, even if your selfishness is doing things for others and things like that, like, you get something out of it. Like, I did something good, like that good endorphin hit there. Like, that's a really crucial thing to figure out. Well, what's in it for them? So yeah, that's one of the things that I would look at to kind of get us going. The other thing is just generally talk to the people. Like, if you're speaking to a sales guy and things like that, ask to speak to a tier 1 support agent. It's the old analogy of, like, see how people treat the receptionists or the cleaners. Like, speak to people at all levels of an organization, and you'll very quickly kind of notice, look at people's average tenure. Not that a short one can be bad, but it's an indicator. It's a kind of blood on the water type thing. Like, there's a thing there. But if you go to an organization and their average tenure is like 6 months or something, probably a strong indication that something's not quite right there. But if they're like, if their business is, we hyper develop people from university degrees until they're attractive enough, they are kind of poached by people who are also a recruitment firm that helps them get found by those people, and they're only expected to be here for kind of 6 to 7 months. Okay, 6 months makes complete sense. So spot the warning signs in the water. Don't be afraid to ask a question. You're in the driver's seat most of the time.
What would you like to thank young Josh for doing?
Well, firstly, I'll paint you a picture of young Josh. So significantly longer hair, almost down to the waist, long ringlets, which is always a kind of great image, going to metal gigs and things like that, which are absolutely, like, looking back, hilarious memories and things like that. For me, one of the crucial pieces is thanking my own teenage laziness. Because my educational track, I didn't go to a university, I don't have masters, I don't have any of that sort of stuff under my belt. And yet I went into a very, very practical engineering course at college. So I was doing your metalwork, your grinding, your welding, your things like that. And it was during the time where the government had insisted you had to do something vocational alongside your very practical course. So I decided to do things like computer sciences and things like that. And my kind of laziness or maybe survival instinct, maybe a mixture of the two, got me to a place where I was like, hang on, I'm slightly naturally better at the computer sciencey pieces that in turn led on to the kind of engineering pieces and support stuff and technology pieces that I mentioned earlier. But one of the main drivers of me going down that route was I didn't want to get burnt anymore. I was really naff at some of the metalwork, And I would come away with burns all up my arms and some of them and things like that. And that's one of the big things that I would say thank you for that. Like, it was figuring out that I had a natural incline a certain way and not being afraid to follow it. You hear about people all the time where, whether it's kind of family pressures or cultural pressures and things like that, where they've felt like they've gone down to a certain route and they probably hit like their mid-40s before they suddenly rebel, buy a motorcycle and go crazy a little bit. Speaking of which, how's Ruby? But anyway.
Babs.
Sorry, yeah, Babs, isn't it?
So it's okay. Babs, by the way, for both my listeners, apart from you, Mum, there's the other listener you see I'm talking to here. Actually, you know what? I checked this morning. It's 1,240 folk. That's just crazy. So thank you very much indeed. I really, really appreciate you listening, and don't forget to leave that 5-star review, by the way. Babs is my pride and joy. It's my second midlife crisis. My first midlife crisis, I married, so she's great. It's Kathy. But no, the second midlife crisis, no, it was a crisis. It was Babs, a 1972 bright flame red MG midget, classic of British sporting engineering. Anyway, go on.
No, it's a lovely car. It's a lovely, lovely car. But for me, it's kind of, I had this piece, whether it was laziness, whether it was instinct, whether it was whatever it was, but I kind of followed the things that I was naturally curious and interested in from a very early age. That's a piece that I'd be like, I'm grateful for that, because who knows where I'd be without that.
Well, there you go. Okay, we're going to wrap up then. Your coordinates. How can people find you, Josh?
So main pieces for me is probably my LinkedIn. If you want to find me on there, Josh Novelle, just search away and you'll find me on there. Always up for a conversation. Like, reach out, like, let's have a chat. I'm always, as you can tell, I'm probably super curious about how other people are doing this. I don't assume that we've got it right in any way, shape, or form. I'm always up to kind of hear how other people are doing it.
Josh Novelle, consummate learner and analytical people person extraordinaire. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thanks, Paul, for having me.
That's a wrap. Thank you for joining me today. Your homework is to leave your 5-star review, and please, any comments you have, you really help me to improve every day, and it also helps people to discover me online. You should check out practical-leadership.academy because you want to help your new managers succeed with hybrid or remote working.